All right, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know if this is probably not turned on too well. Next talk we have Bart Hopper doing avoiding the landmines in your own backyard.
Hello, everybody. When I mention the word landmines, what do you think of? Explosions, okay. Losing a foot. Perhaps the dog in the backyard. You don't want to step in that. You may think of kids that are crippled. I think of hidden dangers that it's easy to overlook. And the things I'm going to talk about today are things that are not necessarily on the COBIT or other audit standards, but things that are easy to overlook, little hidden gems that are easy to step into. I'm going to give you an example of real landmines, how you handle those, and show how it relates to security issues in the workplace. This is my Uncle Tom Hopper. He entered World War II a few days after the initial invasion at Normandy. He was assigned to the 159th Combat Engineering Battalion in charge of building bridges, repairing roads, and clearing minefields. How many of you have seen the old war movies where the combat engineers are clearing minefields? Okay. It usually plays out with a soldier operating a minesweeper, going left and right, carefully stepping through until they can locate the mine from the screech of the metal detector. Once they find one, they reach over and slowly dig it up. Would it surprise you to know that the reality was a lot different? See, the metal detector works great for metallic mines, but a lot of the mines used in the theater were actually non-metallic. So how do you find a non-metallic mine? Well, you can lie on your stomach and slowly gouge at the ground until you find something. The only problem is you don't know where to begin looking. The faster way is to actually walk into a minefield and step on one. Seriously, that was my uncle's job. You see, the mines used in World War II did not explode when you stepped on them. They exploded when you stepped off of them. And my uncle stepped on a lot of landmines. The good news is that he had been properly trained. He knew how to use teamwork and good communication to get out of it without injury. He learned that it makes sense when walking into a minefield to proceed slowly, carefully listening for that telltale click that would let you know what's about to happen. Once you found that mine, you'd let the other people in your company know what had happened. Somebody would carefully retrace your footsteps until they could bring you the end of a 100-foot rope. You'd tie the rope around your waist securely and hang on for what you knew was about to happen. Once they gave the word, 4 or 5 of the other guys in the squad would run as hard and as fast as they could until the slack in the rope would yank you clear of the exploding mine. Seriously. If you were able to pull you far enough and fast enough, you wouldn't be hurt. Now, my uncle had the fortune, or misfortune as it were, to be the smallest guy in the squad. So he got to clear the landmines. But finding one mine isn't enough. You see, you've just had this incredible whiplash, but mines are put in a pattern. You have to go find at least one more mine to be able to find the rest of them. So how does that relate to security? Well, we can look at the issues in our offices and we can gently probe at the security things. It's more accurate than doing scans. To gently probe, you need to use a little diplomacy when you're talking to the people in the business units. You can probe at issues a little bit proactively rather than having to respond after something's already happened. Being proactive and using a little diplomacy, you can build rapport with your coworkers. You can get their buy-in to the process. It is a little bit slower, but it will get you results. The other option is wait and step on a mine. Yeah, you're going to find out what the real issues are. But a lot of times when that happens, people in the business units will start playing the blame game. That's when you're going to go from proactive to reactive, and you better have a good incident response plan to deal with it. People in the business units are going to look at these issues that have popped up, and it's going to undermine your credibility. They're going to say, why did you let this happen? Why didn't you prevent it? Now, the upside of stepping on the mine is it's easy. So let's look at a couple of roles in a typical business. Now, I don't have all the answers. I'm just going to tell you a few things that I've discovered. But I'd like for you to wait and just kind of think about it for a few seconds. What are some of the hidden dangers that could be present in a receptionist area? Yes?
It's the first point of contact for people on the outside, and there's often a phone there that's unprotected.
Exactly. That's a good one. Anybody else have anything?
You could have somebody who's sick come in and sneeze, and the receptionist could get sick.
Oh.
It's dangerous.
It is. It could be the bubonic plague or start of a zombie invasion.
In a lot of cases, they probably have the least security training of anyone in the organization.
Good, good.
Right. And since they are actually at the front of the building, first exposure, like he was just saying, someone could walk in and distract the receptionist while somebody else would come around and put
Oh.
someone on their computer and have access to the network to be able to.
Okay.
Also, everyone is accustomed to talking to the receptionist. So, you walk into the front of the building, she calls back to whomever. If she makes the call that says, if you tell her to do something and she does it, there's that automatic trust that,
Transitive trust.
right,
She trusts you, so they should trust you as well.
right.
Yeah.
They see all kinds of people come and go. They're fairly easy to pretext for falsehoods.
Yeah.
Dressed as the UPS man, will open the door and you go through.
They're seeing so many people with different stories. Anybody else?
They're helpful by nature. I mean, that's the job description, that you're supposed to be helpful to people.
Good. They're evaluated on how friendly they are and warm to the people. Anybody else? Okay, here are the things that I came up with. Every security talk, you have to have somebody talk about a rogue wireless access point. It's just a rule. But a lot of times there's exposed cabling. They may hide it behind some potted plants or something, but if you can catch the receptionist away for a few minutes, you could pop a wireless access point there. I think you mentioned you could put a fucked device on their computer or a keylogger. The visitor log. How much information can you obtain from a visitor's log? You can tell other companies, vendors, if there's a merger that's about to happen, you may be able to tell by the visitor's log. You can leak a lot of information from that. A lot of times the receptionist is sitting up there answering the phone. They're greeting visitors, and there's a lot of spare time. So management, especially in small and medium-sized companies, will drag some of the most sensitive information in the company up to the receptionist for them to type. Think about this. I mean, there may be meeting minutes. There can be spreadsheets, sales spreadsheets. They may be helping with sales presentations. All this information could be useful for somebody, whether it's an industrial spy, a competitor, any number of things. There's a lot of this information that's being pulled up front. Yes?
They tend to be one of their favorite targets, too. There was printed out over a false SSL tunnel right out the front door.
Does the receptionist have their name on the desk a lot of times? That makes it easier to send a...
Well, they're saying their name all the time anyway.
Yeah.
You just stand there.
How many times have you seen a receptionist that would have their monitor exposed where they're typing, but they don't have any kind of glare screen, or their monitor may be positioned where you can actually see what they're typing? You know, you have a lot of your cell phones have cameras. It'd be easy to just snap a picture and then go back and review it later. How many times have you seen a receptionist that would store a door card in the front desk? They hand it to the maintenance man that's got to come through and change air filters or the light bulbs. You know, these things need to be in a secure location, but it's just so easy to put it in that front desk. As I mentioned, the rogue access point, how many people think to enable switch port security on the receptionist desk, where if you have a changed MAC address, it'll disable the port? You know, that would put a stop to your rogue access point unless they spoof the MAC. Classify your security zones. Don't let confidential data go into a public area. Make sure that people are aware that data has certain sensitivity and should only be covered in certain areas. If they're working with the sales department, for example, on presentations, it might make sense to have some rolling carts that if they need to leave the front desk, they could roll it into a secure area. And I mentioned the secure storage. They can put their door cards in there, but they may also want to put their purse. A receptionist is going to be concerned about leaving the front desk and somebody grabbing their credit cards out of their wallet. Let's look at customer service. What can you think of the little hidden gems or hidden vulnerabilities for customer service? Yes?
It's a position that has really high turnover. Chances are, if you call into some sort of customer service, you make contact with someone, they're probably either a new employee or very quickly going to become an ex-employee.
So they're high turnover, low skilled, low tenure, low training, high pressure. They're also judged on friendliness, as you mentioned earlier about the receptionist. A lot of times they're graded on their speed to answer. Yes?
Usually it's in a common open area like a cube farm. So I've often called places and you can easily hear conversations going on probably a cube over if you have sharp ears and somebody might be spilling sensitive information over the phone like social security numbers or something like that.
Okay, so if you're physically in the building, in the customer service, you can overhear conversations that can leak data.
Or even over the phone. I've heard other people's conversations on the other end of the line.
Okay.
Someone sitting in front of 3 feet apart.
Okay. I haven't heard that, but that's a good one. Anybody else? Okay. What I came up with, some places have 24-hour coverage. How much information is dropped between shifts? Do the people on the third and the second shifts get training in social engineering? It's bad enough the people on day shift not getting training. The people on the night shifts may not realize there's anything going on. If you have a new policy, they may not be aware of the new security policies, what you can do. There's always a lag, just like you have a lag between Windows updates coming out and the period when you can actually install them a lot of times because you have to patch and test your systems. The same thing's true with new policies. There's a lag before it gets to the night shift. Wireless headsets. The cheap ones are not encrypted. You could listen in on the conversations and it could give you a microphone into the room. I think you mentioned the chatty reps. They're easy for social engineering. They're used to being helpful. They have a customer focus. Let's look at the next people. Let's look at management and IT. I really couldn't find a good picture that would say, okay, this is a computer person, this is management. A lot of times it blurs. What are some of the hidden things for management and IT and business management? Yes.
Problem that I run into occasionally is I would call it more access than common sense.
They're the boss and they want to have access to everything, domain admin, because they pay for the equipment.
Right.
Yeah?
And maybe don't know A, how to, A, the amount of damage they can do with that stuff, and B, the steps you have to take to make sure that that stuff remains secure. So, head of the IT department is a domain admin, but, keeps his passwords, in a desk drawer.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, too, that some of them have heard about Terry Childs out in San Francisco that went rogue and locked everybody out of their switches and their network. And so some of the management said, we cannot let that happen. So they want these access as well. But if you're able to phish them, if they have these access rights on their NT accounts and you exploit them, you've got everything, too. Yes?
To elaborate on his point, IT staff is almost always overworked and understaffed, and troubleshooting problems. You go to the user's machine, and, well, I can't get this to work. Okay, I'll just make you an admin, and that'll fix it. And
Yeah.
go on to the next problem.
It's easier to give them administrative rights rather than work through the least user privilege to make it work. Yes?
Management also has to have the latest toys, the latest bells and whistles, and the latest swag has to come back with them along offices.
Oh, absolutely. They're going to be the first that's going to want to bring in their iPads even before you have a chance to evaluate whether your data needs to be encrypted or how you're going to do it on your mobile device. They've got to have this. And sometimes it's a prestige thing. I've actually seen managers that would buy the latest and biggest notebook that they never used, but they wanted to have bragging rights because they had this notebook. It's a status thing. It's like your carpet on the floor. Who else has... Going once? Twice? Okay, here's some of the things that I came up with. I've seen people in business management that are concerned about cutting every dollar they can. They fight over paper clips. They go through, they turn off lights, and there's nothing wrong with being conservative and trying to cut your costs. That's how we stay in business and make money. But if you turn off your computer equipment, they may not get the patches. It may interfere with your patch cycle unless you have wake on LAN or procedures to catch these machines that have been turned off that are not being used. I've seen them go through and start flipping off lights. Well, that's okay if it's on an interior, but what happens if it's an exterior? It can compromise your physical security as well. I've heard of skimmers being put in gas stations, and a lot of times they'll target the outside pumps where the station attendant will flip off the overhead lighting at the perimeter to try to save a little money. Yes?
And also, with most times when the cameras or the surveillance cameras are installed, they're usually installed with the lights on during the day, turning them off unless it's a really good camera. They probably cheaped out on that. They can't adjust the low light and any surveillance is worthless.
So the lighting can really impact you. Trying to cut corners by hiring inexperienced systems administrators or other people in other units. Now, I was an inexperienced sysadmin at one time, and I've got nothing wrong with that. I mean, we all have to start somewhere. The problem is if the only technical person or the most experienced technical person is inexperienced. When I first got into network administration, I thought having a backup was disaster recovery. Seriously. And then somebody said, well, you should take a tape home in case there's a fire in the computer room. So I'd take the tape home, And I thought that was it. I really didn't have a concept of what disaster recovery was. Which ties into the next part. Management sometimes doesn't really understand the need for disaster recovery. Symantec did a study earlier this year, and they looked at businesses with between 100 and 1,000 employees. They classified that as a medium-sized business. And of the medium-sized businesses, 47% did not have a disaster recovery plan. It was even worse for small companies with less than 100 employees. In that case, 57% did not have a disaster recovery plan. Of those that do have a disaster recovery plan, only 28% have actually tested it. And the companies without a disaster recovery plan, and 52% of the time, they think that computers are not critical to the operation of the business. That's a landmine. You know, that's something that can affect the health of the company. I've seen a statistic quoted all over the place that says that if a company has a disaster without a disaster recovery plan, that in 80% of the time they'll go out of business within 2 years. Now, I've looked all over the internet and I cannot find anything to substantiate that. It appears to be an urban legend. But I can tell you that having a disaster recovery plan is an example of due care that can help keep the shareholders or whoever off your back and keep you from being criminally negligent. Sometimes management will go, they're constrained for resources, they're overworked, and so they go outside the company for development. They hire the shadow IT department. You may see the business units go around the IT department to bring in somebody from the outside. The problem is that a lot of times these people are improperly vetted. You don't know who this is that's working on your system. If they're developing a system for you, they may be trying to use your production data to use development at their site, and it could be unencrypted data. They may have access to your innermost secrets, and they can put who knows what on your network if they allow a shadow IT department. I'm sure you've never seen any of that happen. IT. Well, as I mentioned, the inexperienced IT people, if they understand how to do vulnerability assessment and patch management, how easy is it to overlook the third-party applications? You know, most of the exploits these days are Flash, Acrobat, Java. Those are the ones that everybody's hitting. We're doing a good job of patching those, hopefully, but there's a lot of other software out there that's easy to overlook, especially, as you mentioned, if they have local admin on their machine, they may be installing unapproved things like iTunes from 4 or 5 versions back. Local admin. An inexperienced admin has a good chance of having the same local administrator account on every machine. If you have one machine compromised, it's a pass-the-hash attack away from total domination. Self-documenting naming conventions. Now, some of you will argue with me on this, but hear me out. How many times have you seen network conventions where they would say FS in the machine name, mail, PDC, Exchange, SQL Server, Oracle? Well, it makes it easier for the administrator to maintain. But if one machine gets popped through a drive-by exploit, whatever, all they have to do is look at the ARP cache and the DNS cache to see what machines are out there. They'll know where the goodies are without having to make a lot of noise. They can go directly to home. They can go directly there, without any kind of noise to tip off what's going on. Production data and development. I'm sure the developers would never want a full copy of your production database to validate that their code works correctly. But how many people think of securing their development environment? We want to secure a production environment, but who's really watching the dev environment? DR, business continuity, and incident response. Are you doing logging, patching on a regular basis on your DR equipment? It's so easy to forget that. Your DR storage. You have a DR plan that has to be accessible in case the cockeye hits the rotary object. But a lot of times it has confidential information that can be used to exploit the entire environment. How many people think to secure that stuff? They may have it laying on desk around the office. I've seen disaster recovery plans where we just had the end of the world occur. We don't want to be locked out of our DR equipment, so we're going to assign simple passwords to the DR machines like password, crisis. I see a few smiles. I think you've seen this too, right? Repurposed equipment. I worked at a place that we had the disaster site at a sister company. And they could see this idle equipment just sitting over there. And when they had a machine failure, well, we want to borrow it in case, we can save a little money. And if something actually happens, we'll replace it. Of course, the equipment just kind of gets absorbed into the inventory and it never is seen again. And it can have all your configuration information. Incident, yes?
I'm also seeing with passwords where they might do a good job of keeping complex passwords, keeping them like key pass or something like that, but when you forget to keep a physical printout copy secured somewhere up to date, so if they lost access to the file, they don't have the password.
You're locked out of the key pass. Yeah. Incident response. As bad as it is for companies that do not have a business continuity and disaster recovery plan, it's even worse for incident response. And incident response is so vital these days. There was a study by Panda Security earlier this year that said that their online scanner, now keep in mind, the people that go to their online scanner usually already have an antivirus program on their computer. But they think that they may still have a virus on their computer because it's not detecting anything. So 40% of those scans detect malware. And of the malware, 68% is Trojans. Now, in small businesses or medium-sized businesses, a lot of times they don't even know what a Trojan is. That somebody's remote controlling your computer and siphoning the data out of your company. Incident response is so critical that even, and oddly enough, big companies overlook it. Sony, when they had their issue, did not have an incident response plan. The cost of that is $171 million and counting. Can anybody else think of anything with DR, business continuity, incident response? Yes?
So, talking about repurposed equipment, when I was a desk side IT guy, nothing would make me angrier than, we buy assets over time. So, we bought Dells, and now we buy HPs, and now we get, from this company. And it forms this sort of archaeological, it's like a dig, right?
Yeah.
And so, that's beige. Like, I don't have to open it up, I don't have to turn it on. Computers aren't beige anymore. Why the hell is this thing still here?
Right.
And it's because people trade assets around and things like that. And so there's the hand-me-down. It's like when you're in a big family, the oldest kids get the new things and they get handed down so the managers and the top dogs get the new equipment and it immediately gets handed down through the ranks. A lot of times without the IT department's input. And so what happens is somebody calls and is like, I've got my machine's just a complete mess with, malware, viruses, or whatever. And I'll walk over and It's been, shown to steadily less and less important to people, but it's all plugged into the same network. It all talks to the same servers, and it's a wholly owned subsidiary of the People's Republic of China. That's my.
It's their all-site backup.
Right.
Yeah. I've actually worked in places where they would look at the equipment as a right of seniority. Oh, I've got seniority over them. I want the faster computer, so move it to my desk. I don't know if, surely y'all have never seen that either. Yeah. I've seen equipment that would move from department to department, and it would still have the data from the other department. Yeah, I see a few nods in the crowd. You've seen that. This is how you get data leaked out, and you don't know what you've got that's gone. Anything else? Yes? They update it like every decade?
I've never seen one updated.
Really? That's scary. I mean, there's a lot of people that they've got it one time, and they don't realize that, business knows we need a disaster recovery plan, and they don't realize the work that you do every day changes it. The disaster recovery plan is a snapshot in time that just gradually ages till it's absolutely worthless. Anybody else? Yes?
I guess not to turn this into a bitch fest, but to speak to his point, I got to look at the disaster recovery plan at a prior place of work, and they talked about going back to retrieve info from microfiche.
Microfiche. You want to explain for the... I'm old enough that I know what microfiche is. It's a little bitty thing that you have to get on a projector to look. I've never actually seen it, but it's really, really old.
Yeah, social security numbers, the whole nasty bit.
Or opposite of the scale of deploy brand new applications, some new web app, get it up and running just to make everyone in the business happy, and never ever go back and document the bloody thing, or add it to the monitoring system, up, down, alerting, and all that either.
Mm-hmm. Well, moving equipment around messes up your software inventory unless you have an automated system. And a lot of small shops don't, and they have to go through and inventory the software. If you're, fortunately, a lot of times if you're in a bigger company, you can buy the software that inventories the stuff and helps you patch it. But small shops, yeah. The sales guy. Think about that for a minute. Actually, it made my list. Yes?
They travel a lot.
Good. And what happens when they travel a lot?
Free Wi-Fi.
Free Wi-Fi?
Well, assets get stolen, phones get left on trains,
Lack of encryption on the device?
Their other
Probably
devices.
tend to carry more mobile devices than anybody else there.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hardly hear you.
They probably tend to carry more mobile devices as far as notebooks and iPhones and whatnot than anybody else.
Multiple devices?
Yeah.
Okay. What else? Yes?
Typically got the latest and greatest stuff for show.
Oh, you've got to represent the company. You've got to show that newest gadget. Yes?
Well, with the travel thing, it means they sit on, foreign networks a lot. So hotel networks, hospitality networks, airport networks, other company networks.
Typhoid Mary.
Right.
Yeah, that made my list too. It's kind of like Family Feud. Yes?
They will tell the customer anything to make the sale and everything to make
Including your company secrets, right? They'll pull a full diagram of your network if they know it and give it to the customer.
They will email
Yes. They'll brag about what great security and here's the blueprint. Oh, you want our SAS 70? We don't need a non-disclosure. Here. Well, I'm sorry, SSAE 16 or whatever you call it now. Yes.
It's compliance that they're soliciting is important enough. That client will get a tour of the facility, get introduced, let's let them in the vault so they can see how secure it is. So, and if you're James Bond class social engineer, you can be that guy that gets
Exactly. In one of my previous companies, we actually had somebody pose as a potential customer, but it was a competitor. How often do your salespeople really vet the people they're trying to sell to? Think about that. They want to make a sale anywhere they can. Yes?
On that same line, you could get new salesmen coming in where they have to see everything so they know how to sell a company, and then they quit the job a week later.
Have y'all ever seen my presentation? You're calling out some of the good ones. You're exactly right. They have to have access to everything. Who else? Okay, here's what I came up with. Frequent turnover. Some of them will actually go out of their way to grab sales data for other territories to take with them to the new company. And if they don't go to that point, they may be social engineered to reveal some information they don't need. You should have information compartmentalization. Excessive rights on their mobile devices. You don't want to give them local admin on their machine, but they need to be able to install the print driver so they can give someone a copy of their presentation. They need to be able to connect to wireless access points. So, you can go through and add them to the network operators group, and you can selectively enable things, but at the end of the day, if they've been trying for 6 months to get to talk to somebody, they don't want to fly across the country and be locked out of their computer. So you're going to have an uphill battle on that. Prawn. It can get lonely traveling on the road a whole lot. They may be looking at the art photos and the foreign films. Typhoid Mary, you mentioned. They go out, they're on whatever network. They come back to the office, it's easy to spread it to everybody else. And your full disk encryption is useless if the machine's owned with malware. It's already unlocked and running. Security. Let's don't forget our role in it. How many times, and I've been guilty of this myself, you talk to the user and, some people are really trying and they just can't quite get it. And other people are frequent flyers. They keep locking their passwords out. If they got frequent flyer miles, they could fly anywhere in the world with this. It's easy to start thinking of them as having the ID 10T error, which spells idiot for those who don't know. Or PEBCAC, the problem exists between the chair and the keyboard. But we also want to focus on the complex stuff. We want to think about how we can pop, with search engine poisoning, something on the internet with the iframe. They'll get owned. We'll get a machine. We'll hop the VLANs. We'll get reverse shell. We'll break all this encryption. But we overlook the simple things. The little everyday things that will trip us up. We want to focus and think of the firewall as a perimeter. But it's not. It's actually your people. The people are the ones operating this equipment, and they'll get you in trouble. You don't want to be viewed as Dr. No. No, you can't do this, you can't do that. You've got to realize that a business functions to make money. And it's hard for us to put that aside sometimes and think, we want this latest firewall, we want to spend all this money, but you have to look at the cost of the data that you're protecting and have protection measures that are commensurate with the value of the data you're protecting. If the cost to repair something is $1,000, it doesn't make sense to spend $10,000 to protect it. Am I preaching to the choir? It's an easy trap to fall into. And we put so much work into what we do. It's easy to swagger. And sometimes that will turn off the people that we work with it can interfere with their communication. And being able to communicate with people in other business units is the key to success. Because otherwise, they're going to undermine your efforts. They're going to go to the shadow IT department. They're not going to report the issue when they've got something that's so burdensome they can't get their job done. You want to make security controls as transparent as possible, so they're not constantly trying to avoid or work around your controls. I heard of a story, and I cannot substantiate this, but there was one of the courthouses that had a lock to get back into the area. And it was so burdensome to people having to constantly badge in and badge out. They went through there so much that they'd prop the door open. Well, the problem was a gunman came in and killed a lot of people in this courthouse that would have been stopped by this locked door. Now, I'm not saying you could necessarily do away with that locked door, but there may be other ways of approaching that risk that's not quite as burdensome. You know, perhaps you've got surveillance cameras or metal detectors before you get there. You know, there's other ways of addressing that. Or if you have to have that, if you can communicate the risk and make sure they understand why that door is locked, that can help your compliance. But you know, real heroes don't have to swagger. My uncle that I was telling you about a little bit earlier, the last time I talked to him, he told me a little bit about his activities in the war. I knew he'd been in the war, but he told me about repairing roads and building bridges and clearing mines. He didn't really talk a whole lot about the other stuff. He did say that in battle, everyone's frightened. But you go ahead with the mission anyway. And you always look after your buddy. He was out. I really didn't realize what a hero he was until after he passed away. It was only after I was able to look through some of his papers that I realized what the real story was. You see, I mentioned that he went into World War II a little bit after the invasion at Normandy. But he was out repairing roads one day on December 16th, 1944, when the German army started a major counteroffensive that became known as the Battle of the Bulge. It caught everybody by surprise. The 4th Infantry Division had suffered major casualties. So Major General Barton needed reinforcements. He contacted Major General Middleton and asked for anybody he could have that would help him. So Major General Middleton assigned the 159th Combat Engineering Battalion to the 12th Infantry Regiment. They were assigned to take and hold Hill 313 in Luxembourg. They were able to take the hill, and they had to try to dig in foxholes in the frozen sub-zero December to try to build foxholes. But they were cut off. They were surrounded by the enemy. They came under heavy artillery barrages. Waves of soldiers kept trying to retake the hill. Scores of the men in the 159th Battalion were killed or wounded. For 7 days, even the radio had failed. They did not know if help was coming. Finally, even though they were outnumbered 3-1, other units of General Patton's army came to rescue them. For valor in the face of the enemy, my Uncle Tom was awarded the Silver Star. That's the 3rd highest award in the Army in those days, only below the Medal of Honor and the Distinguished Service Cross. I'm quite honored to have someone so brave in my family. In memory of Corporal Thomas E. Hopper, 3rd Army, 8th Corps, 159th Engineering Battalion, Company B. Anybody have any questions? Comments? Further venting? Thank you.